the continuation of exercise 1, Linnea Dick.
Gela Kasla Gugigame. Gela Kasla Ninok Sala. Gela Kasla Utma. I just started with a traditional welcoming which thanks the people who came before me. I said, thank you to my chief. Thank you to those who hold the knowledge, and thank you to our noble women, the ones who came before me, who paved the way. I try to speak in my language, Kwakwala, as much as I can. After colonization, most of the First Nations cultures in Canada lost their traditions. They were punished severely in residential school for speaking their own language. So unfortunately, I don't know my language fluently. My dad, his Kwakwala was his first language. When he was put into school, he was strapped anytime he spoke his own language. And so I am trying now to learn as much as I can because my father doesn't even speak our language fluently anymore. When we entered, you might have heard the recording. That was my father. His name is Chief Bodick, Gigigame Walisquayam, which means chief large whale. It's just really funny because he has a very big spirit, and and I like that Candace is laughing because she knows my father quite well. I'm very thankful that I grew up with my father. He is very knowledgeable in our traditions and in our ways. I grew up in a carving shop a lot of the time. There was always a shop in my house, and so I grew up amongst carvers, and I grew up in the longhouse, the big house, our ceremonial place of tradition, and I grew up around dancers and chiefs and noblewomen. And my dad is my chief, and he is a dancer, and he is a carver, and beyond that, he's one of my best friends. But it hasn't always been that way. When I was a teenager, I lost my way. I began drinking a lot and doing drugs and just not loving myself because I'd lost my purpose and my sense of identity. These are trickle effects of colonization of the residential schools. I experienced a lot of abuse and trauma as a child, not from my parents, but from someone who was supposed to take care of me from my own community, who was my babysitter. And instead of healing myself, I kept it a secret until I was 17. And so until I finally shared my story, I was very self-destructive. And in hurting myself, I think I really hurt the people around me. And one day my dad had a heart attack, and he came to Victoria to go to the hospital to have it fixed. And this was during a time where an activist movement was going on. It's a grassroots movement called Idle No More, where many people stood up and voiced their concerns of what was going on in Canada and other parts of the world. And it was not limited to few issues, it was everything that was happening, including environmental issues, abuse within the communities, loss of the culture. There was different groups who joined in, and one day my younger sister, when we were sitting with my dad on the couch, she went over to the computer, and she was really excited, and she was looking at all this stuff where these people were doing protests, peaceful protests. and she called me and my dad over to the computer, and she was like, look at what's going on in the world, look at what's going on in Canada. People are standing up for their rights. And at that point, collectively as a family, we decided that we would embark on a journey, which we called a Wallace Kines, which means, in my language, to make a statement. The statement that we were making is we used a tradition called a copper cutting, which hadn't been practiced for over a century. And the act of the copper cutting was to take a shield of copper, which is very sacred to our families because it's our whole identity. It has a name, it has our history, it has our dances, it tells us the ownership of what belongs to whose family and the rights that we have as a people. So for us to cut it was a very big act, and it was painful for us as well to have to do that. And another statement that we were making is our culture, which was suppressed into submission, that we were losing this sacred way that we used to practice. We were using it against the government. And we embarked on our journey from the northern tip of Vancouver Island to the Parliament building in Victoria, which is the Parliament of BC. And we did a copper cutting ceremony there. And during the travels, it was really incredible. Growing up, I always felt out of place. I had experienced trauma as a child, abuse, and then I went to school to be bullied because I was so different. I had a different way of thinking. I didn't believe in the structure of life that was built around us. That wasn't my ways, and that didn't speak to my identity. And at some point I lost myself because I just wanted to blend in with everyone. But going on this journey and traveling from community to community and receiving support and realizing there were other people out there who had the same concepts that I did, that believed in something greater than materialistic value, really inspired me to awaken. And the final day of the journey, which was 10 days, we did a final march from the highway just outside of Victoria into the city, and hundreds of people joined us. And we were surprised because a lot of times when we were entering these communities, though they were welcoming, though they sheltered us and fed us, there was a small group of people. But on that last day, hundreds of people walked with us from many different nations, many different cultures from all around the world. And when we arrived at the Parliament, there was about 3,000 to 4,000 people standing there waiting. And everyone was full of gratitude and understanding of what we were doing. And after the journey ended, that was when I finally found myself, and I began to believe in myself, and I started to practice my traditions and culture that I'd almost forgotten about, and I became who I really am. My English name is Linnea Dick, but my given name is Malidi, a Kwakwaka'wakw word which means to find your way on an uncharted course, which I believe means to follow my heart. And it is that which has brought me here to speak to all of you today. When I was nervous last night at a dinner we had, I was sharing some of my anxiousness with someone who was there. And she said, "Don't be afraid, we are with you." She didn't say we are here for you. She said we are here with you. And I think it's really important that we all reach out to each other and hold each other up. In my culture, there are many traditions of healing, of spirituality, which empower us and give us a sense of purpose. But there's also a mythology. And in many of our mythologies, people believe they start with people who don't believe in themselves. So I'll share a myth with you today. There was a boy from a village where I'm from. He was Kawakwaka'wakw. And his mother died during childbirth. And he was born with a cleft lip. And his father didn't love him because his loved one died giving birth to him. And the children in his community didn't accept him because he spoke funny, because he looked funny. And being an outcast from society made him a little bit unable to socialize. He was a little bit strange. He was withdrawn within himself. He had no sense of identity of who he truly was and no sense of purpose. And he often wondered to himself, why am I here? And one day he was so upset because the children in his community had been teasing him that he just started running and running and running. And he ran through the forest and he reached a huge mountain and he started to climb it. And his initial thought was that he would jump off the top and end his life. And as he began to climb, he heard this noise. And these quartz crystals began to attach themselves to his body. And the higher he climbed, the more quartz crystals attached to his body. And when he reached the top, he paused for a moment. And when he jumped, he didn't fall, he flew. Perhaps he didn't want to kill himself after all. Maybe what really happened was a leap of faith. And I do believe that's what I took when I went on that journey. I relate to this heroine, and perhaps I am, and I'm sure all of you have been that person at one point or another in your life. And after he jumped and he flew, he traveled around the world 4 times. 4 is a sacred number in our culture, because there's 4 directions, 4 colors of beings, 4 elements of life, and it's our spiritual number. And when he arrived back home to these people who never showed him love, instead of showing them anger and saying, I'm powerful now, look what I can do to you, or look at how I'm above you, he embraced them and he shared with them the gifts. And that gift now is a dance in my culture called the madam. And it's one of the most beautiful dances that I've witnessed and has been my favorite since I was a child. I remember watching those people dance that. And recently I went to a potlatch and I was given the opportunity to dance that myself from a young chief who just got his chieftainship. And I think that the way of my people, which believe so much in connectedness with all fellow beings, people and animals, and with Mother Earth, with all of nature, all of the environment, we really believe that we hold each other up. And despite the terrorist acts that have happened against us during colonization, we still embrace those people. It requires a lot of forgiveness, like the heroine in the story. He forgave his people. And you can't educate people being angry at them. You can't educate people believing that they're stupid. You have to love, and that's the only way to bring about change. And you do have to fight. But our ways of fighting aren't with cruelty, violence, and war. You can't fight terrorism with terrorism because it makes the world ugly. You fight with beauty. You show people a different way. And that's why I'm here to speak to you today, in hopes that maybe my own story will inspire some of you. And I will close on the note of a phrase that I learned this year, which I'm really proud of learning because our language is very hard to speak. And it is Ich idala mase hus nala. And it means, I am wishing you a brighter day. And I truly, you can say that I'm wishing you a better day, but to say brighter, I think really shows that each of us have a light within us. And when we shine that light, we allow other people to get out of their darkness as well. Gila Kesla.
Thank you so much, Linnea, Nilas, and Tony, for sharing these stories with us and for your exercises of freedom. These are three of the many voices that you will listen to within the Parliament of Bodies. As you can see, they are very different to each other. They're very heterogeneous. There is not just one single discourse. We have to find ways of communicating with each other, of speaking different languages. Linnea was saying today, dancing between worlds, right? So we have to find ways of dancing between many different stories and many different worlds. And I would like to invite you to ask questions, maybe, but after that, everything that has been said, I don't know if we're ready for the questions and answers. Maybe since many of the people have been waiting outside and you've been sitting here for a long time, maybe it's a good idea that we change positions and that we go outside, we have a drink, we can keep discussing, and then we come back in 20 minutes for Sergio Ceballos' exercise of freedom, if you think that that's okay. And we will have still like 10 days of many bodies and many different voices to keep like listening to voices of the Parliament of Bodies and to keep discussing. So even after Sergio Ceballos' intervention today, we will be able to keep together if you want and keep talking. Okay.